Hello and welcome to part 2 of the NAB AFL Trade Wrap. We're going alphabetically through all the clubs to let you know how your team fared at the end of the trade period. We are up to the reigning premiers Hawthorn. They gained a couple of handy additions and managed late in the day to get a draft pick back in the second round thanks to the Crows. Peter Ryan, you're first up in this segment.
Well, Matthew, great effort by the defending premiers to get the most sought-after free agent in the competition, James Frawley. He's a defender. He's going to replace Brian Lake, who's getting old. Josh Gibson just slots in beautifully, Nick. John O'Rourke, they've also picked him up. They had to give away a first-round pick, but he was pick number 2 a couple of years ago. He's a quality player. Oh, he's at least a quality young player, so potentially he can slot into that midfield. They then lost Mitch Hallahan, Luke Loudon. Look at Frawley. I mean, Frawley's had to put up with 60, 70 inside 50s a week playing for Melbourne, and he's stood up. Imagine what he's going to be like at Hawthorn with the players around him. He's a quality player and he'll go the next level. John O'Rourke, we haven't seen a lot of him. I hardly recognise him if I walk down the street, to be honest. But he's got talent. He was a highly rated junior. He slots into one of the best midfields in the competition, and we know that they can develop players like a few other clubs, so he'll do really well. Hallahan hasn't played a lot. Loudon hasn't played a lot. Chaney hasn't played a lot. They get opportunities elsewhere. That's what a good club does. Hawthorn's done a great effort.
I think also, Pete, the fact that they hang on to Ryan Schoenmakers will be important. It sort of gives them that sort of key defensive depth as well. So another win for the Hawks.
Jono sent in a tweet. He said he'd recognise you. Can you give us a grade?
No disrespect. A.
An A for the Hawks. It's amazing, isn't it? The reigning premiers doing so well. Now to Melbourne. Massive compo for Frawley, as we know, and they cheaply snared a speedy goal stink.
They did, Matty, and I think, look, Melbourne supporters were really up and about when they got pick 3 for Frawley, because I think it's fair to say that if they'd traded him out, they wouldn't have got a pick that high. So that gives them pick 2 and 3 in the draft, which is absolutely massive now, and they'll be backing themselves to obviously make these two count. Lumumba from Collingwood, Garlett from Carlton, give them that sort of experience. They probably see Sam Frost, I think, obviously from GWS as being someone who can sort of help cover Frawley's loss as well. Yeah,
no doubt about that. And they get Clark, who was retired, and they basically get Heredia Lumumba, and adds pace to the backline. So that's a good result for them.
Were they ever going to trade picks 2 and 3 just quickly?
I think there was talk, wasn't there?
Yeah,
but I think
definitely. They made a few phone calls. They would have been going through a list of Dangerfield and some of the best players in the competition and saying, is there a chance?
All right, great.
Well, look, I think it's a B, Matty, and primarily because they held on to those picks, and I think that if they'd had that right player, fantastic, but if you don't, hold on to them. B. All
right, the D's going to be key players on draft day. Now to North Melbourne, they gained a couple of free agents, but lost a solid citizen.
Yeah, well, they look like first time down the straight, Nick. They passed the finishing post and they look well in front. First day of free agency, they had Jared Waite and Sean Higgins, and they look sweet. And then all of a sudden, Levi Greenwood, unsigned. They weren't able to get him contracted this year. And then he accepted a deal to go to Collingwood. So that probably put a bit of the slows on what they'd done. Jared Waite, he's 30, but he played his best game last year against North Melbourne. We saw how good he was. He can kick goals. Sean Higgins just adds versatility. You probably don't realise how young he is, 26, 27. He's struggled with injuries, but we all know that he's silky. He can play either end of the ground. And he slots into that North Melbourne group that's just an expanding sort of midfield. So I think they're, a reasonable effort from the Roos.
I think so, Pete. I think that, obviously it was that cracking start with free agency, getting Wade and Higgins on the first couple of days. Had a crack at obviously Adam Cooney, Travis Farco as well. Missed out on them, but I don't see those as being perhaps, crucial losses.
They played in the preliminary final. Do they think they're close to a premiership, or are they just stockpiling?
Oh, look, I think that they're just being pragmatic and looking to improve their list any way they can, and I think that they see certainly free agency as a really good tool because you're not having to trade, obviously, for these players, and I think that they're still probably looking to take, I think, 4 picks into this year's draft.
I think they did well to miss out on Adam Cooney, to be honest, because they were getting an old list.
Yeah, I agree.
I reckon they think their window's open. Give us a grade.
B minus.
B minus for the Kangaroos. You love your B minuses, don't you?
I just slotted in the minus there just to differentiate the Roos.
All right, Port Adelaide now. They got their man, and Matthew Lobe finally gets some help.
Well, look, it was all obviously about Paddy Ryder, this one, wasn't it, Matty? And by God, what a drawn-out process it was. Didn't look as though it was going to get done. I think pick 17 available early in the week. But mediation yesterday, Jason Cripps, I think, deserves a medal, obviously, for his work.
Would have loved to have been in that mediation room.
Would have been sensational. But he's got the job done. They've got pick 37 thrown in there as well, which I think is a really value pick. He's one of the few ruckmen, Matty, who can play in the ruck, but also play a fair proportion of his time down forward and be effective, which I think will make him a really effective combination with Matthew Lobie at Port. Look, they had some interest in Daniel Gorringe as well, but I think pick 37 probably would have been needed to get that done. When that went to the rider deal, that fell over, but I still think they got their main man.
Just quickly, Pete?
Yeah, well, I was going to say one rider on it was that they missed out on Daniel Gorringe, but they also held on to those quality young players, which is tight group.
Yeah, no, important.
A grade?
B+.
B+. That's probably more orthodox, a B+.
Thank you, Matty. Yeah.
Now to Richmond. The medical obviously scared them away from Trengo, so they did nothing.
Yeah, we don't want to say a lot here, except to say they did 2 or 3 medicals on Trengove and picked up that injury in the last scan, so they were a bit lucky.
Imagine if Trengove had a return to training 2 weeks later. He could be on the Richmond list right now.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Really shocking luck for Trengove. Terrible. And I think when the news came through, it wasn't so much about Richmond being lucky, it was about how unlucky Trengove was. We'd love to see him recover because we all saw how good he was in those first 2 years. Nothing much to say here about the Tigers.
But you can give them a grade?
C. I told you I give C's to those who do nothing.
C for the Tigers, and good luck to Jack in all seriousness. Now to St Kilda. They kept pick 1 in the end, apart from the fact that 4 clubs approached them over it, and now they have 3 picks in the top 22.
Yeah, they have obviously kept pick 1, Matty, and I think that suggests to me they're probably going to take Christian Petrarca, the young midfielder from Eastern Rangers. I think the big win that they had here, though, was the Reece Stanley trade for pick 21. They've under Chris Pelkin, they've got that real strategy of trying to get a number of picks inside that top 20. They've got 3 inside the top 22, which I think's close enough. So I think that's a win. That they look as though they'll probably get, I think, Tim Membry in the pre-season draft as well. So I think it's been a pretty decent period for them.
2 questions for you, Nick. Do you reckon they were fair income about trading pick 1, and why Petrarca and not McCartan?
I think they were fair income about trading pick 1, but again, the price had to be right. I think that the one thing is that they when they decided probably that and I'm assuming here that they wanted Petrarca, they wouldn't deal with Greater Western Sydney, because I think that if they had, they were going to take Petrarca with pick 1.
They wouldn't tell us today either the 4 clubs they'd been in talks with over pick 1. I'm intrigued to know. Maybe we'll find out in the coming days. A grade?
B.
B for the Saints from Nick Bowen. Now to the Sydney Swans. And really, Pete Ryan, a ridiculous AFL decision here killed their chance of any action.
Well, the best trader for probably the last 6 or 7 years, banned from the trading period, mysterious. I mean, we don't really had a chance to debate the decision. They've lost Malcheski through free agency and they offloaded Shane Biggs. But getting back to that decision, we can't comprehend it. The thing that I can't comprehend about it was why it wasn't made public before the trade period actually started, so that everyone could debate its merits, get on the front foot and say, well, look, this is the reasons why. Now everyone thought mysterious. We had John Longmire on Trade Radio saying, oh, we're not looking to do any deals, when really he wasn't allowed to do any deals. Strange.
It's bizarre, isn't it, Nick?
Yeah,
and we haven't really got any clear answers from the AFL on it.
Well, I think the funny thing is, Matty, it's not as though these things couldn't be worked out, is it? I mean, we've got some pretty intelligent guys at the club level and obviously at the AFL. Ken Wood's a genius in these sort of things. I'm sure he could have factored in COLA components, that sort of thing. But
that's the cost of living allowance for those who weren't aware.
Yes, thank you. But I think also that the funny thing from my point of view was that the Swans put up John Longmire as their contact during the trade period, only though when a deal was done. So I think John had a pretty luxurious time sort of over that one.
To be fair, I think they thought that COLA would be scrapped, and then it got phased back in, and it got to that point where the only decision that they thought they could make was to rule Sydney out of the trading period. But it was disappointing that supporters and the general public didn't know.
All right, we can't really give Sydney a grade then, so perhaps for the league?
I gave them an F. With all great respect. But really, we should have known about the decision. Supporters deserve that. I don't really have any opportunity to debate the merits of the decision. I mean, there's no great loss, to be honest. But
Pete Ryan, special delivery for league headquarters. Good on you, Pete. Now to the West Coast Eagles, a very quiet trade period for them. It was funny when their representatives walked into trade headquarters, no one really wanted to talk to them.
No, look, I think Craig Vozzo and Rowan O'Brien had very, very easy sort of times over this period, Matty. Look, Travis Varco was probably their #1 target. Obviously, ended up going to Collingwood. I think he would have sort of added a little bit of pace to the Eagles. I think that's one area, perhaps through the midfield and certainly down forward, where he could have really sort of helped the list. So that's a little bit disappointing. Jeff Garlett was mentioned a little bit. There was no real, I think, great interest in him. Likewise, Kane Lucas as well, who they just elected to sort of not pursue any further. So, yeah, really inactive sort of period from them.
And you get to give them their grade?
I'll give them a C-.
Oh, C- for the Eagles. OK, now to the Western Bulldogs. Finally, they have got a decent key forward, of course, in Tom Boyd, but they've lost their skipper. This was an intriguing trade period for the Doggies.
An incredible trade period, really. When you look at that list, they've lost Ryan Griffin, their captain, Sean Higgins, Adam Cooney, a Brownlow medalist, Liam Jones, who they've pinned their hopes on, and pick 6.
And their coach as well.
And their coach is gone as well. If you had this time last week, you would have given them a G. Then they made this miraculous sort of attempt to get Tom Boyd, which we didn't think would happen. It did happen, so full credit to them, but they've paid a lot for him. He's only played 9 games. He's kicked 8 goals. He's obviously the #1 draft pick from last year. He did have Bulldog supporters up and excited and smiles back on their faces, and he's given them renewed hope. So I can see from that point of view they had to take the punt, but it's a big punt. He's got a 7-year contract, $1 million a year.
He'd want to play well, mate, wouldn't he?
He'd want to play well.
Yeah. Look, for me, it's a massive price, and I think that, look, if we take the Giants at face value, Matty, which I think we can, that they weren't going to do the deal, the Bulldogs essentially made it impossible, I think, for them to refuse, throwing in pick 6, you know, essentially paying this huge chunk of Ryan Griffin's contract as well. Is it going to be worth it? You know, time will tell, but, you know, they could have had a deal where they got pick 4 from the Giants and sort of loaded up on the really good young kids that they've sort of traded for drafted over the last couple of years. So, risky strategy.
Imagine if Tom Boyd wasn't in that left-hand column, though. Yeah. As a gain.
Yeah, that's a feel-good thing, isn't it, I think, for the Dogs.
And for their fans as well. All right, the last grade of the show.
Well, I gave them a B-, and that is B for Boyd.
Good on you.
Oh, here we go.
That's terrific. All right, before we go, winners and losers of the trade period, just very quickly, let's start with the positive, the winners from both of you.
Well, I think the Hawks are the winners. They got James Frawley, they're defending premiers, they got a defence and good effort from them.
The Lions for mine, Matty, I think they've got, as we said, 2 elite midfielders in Beams and Christensen. They'll be so much better next year.
And Nick, you like to go negative, so we'll go with you first.
That's unkind.
That's a bit.
Where are you getting that from?
Probably a little bit harsh. But the losers for you.
Oh, look, it's hard to sort of pin anyone. I mean, I don't think you can give it to the Swans because their hands were tied. Perhaps West Coast, I mean, they didn't have much activity and perhaps would have liked to see them go a little bit harder at Trav Varco.
Well, you'd have to give it to the Swans. They couldn't do anything. They're the best traders, and despite Nick saying that, I disagree entirely.
Oh,
boys,
there you go.
Congratulations for all your hard work on the phones over the past few weeks. It's been amazing. Great working with you again. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Matty.
Peter Ryan and Nick Bowen. All right, make sure you keep clicking back to afl.com.au. We have the latest news, videos, updates, all the news you need to know as the off-season continues on the road to 2014 and, of course, the 2014 NAB AFL Draft coming up on the Gold Coast in the weeks to come. For now, it's goodbye.